Well, good afternoon, everyone. I want to lead off talking about the proposed infrastructure bill. It's pretty clear that it's about a whole lot of things other than infrastructure. And as you've heard us all say repeatedly already, only 6% of it is about roads and bridges. More money in there for electric cars than what most Americans think is infrastructure. But what I want to focus on in particular is the 2017 tax bill, the enormous success that it brought to our country. If you go back to February of 2020, the month before the pandemic hit, we had the best economy we had in 20 years. I think we had 3.5% unemployment. The big driver of that economic success was the 2017 tax bill. People have a tendency to focus on the corporate rates, but let's look at the other things they would do. Take the estate tax, for example. The exemption currently in the law for estates is about $11 million per person. What that does is allow family farms and small businesses to be passed down to the next generation without, in effect, being confiscated by the federal tax structure. In addition to that, the way the estate tax works, if you acquire an asset early in life and it builds up over the years, you're not taxed on the inside buildup. But alas, in the proposal that the Democrats have put together, you'd be taxed on the inside buildup of a lifetime. The exemption would be lowered to $1 million, which may sound like a lot of money to some people, but not if you've got a small business or a family farm. And then they'd apply on top of that, above the exemption, an enormous 40% rate. The point of this is this tax bill of 2017, undone, would create an extensive loss of jobs in our country, do exactly the wrong thing, and move us in the wrong direction. What should we be doing? Others can address it. Infrastructure is popular. We need to have an infrastructure bill as big as we're willing to credibly pay for without going back and undoing the 2017 tax bill. It took 30 years to get another comprehensive tax bill after 1986, and I don't think there's going to be much, if any, sentiment among Senate Republicans for undoing the 2017 tax bill.
There were a number of us that had the opportunity a couple of weeks ago to head down to the Mexican border. Senator Barrasso and his team helped document that trip. Some of you may have seen some of the footage from that. But we saw some pretty remarkable things. We saw a lot of young children who had been forced to make, I should say, the traumatic journey into this country. We heard about the smugglers who are being enriched and benefiting from that. And the reason we made the trip, honestly, is a lot of us, I think, wanted to see firsthand what was happening. But secondly, because the administration, the president and the vice president's now been tasked supposedly with leading the administration's efforts on immigration, haven't been there. And the press hasn't been able to get there to see what's going on. It is a full-blown crisis at the border, which desperately needs to be addressed. And it is important that the American people know what's going on there. And I hope the administration will realize the error of their ways in getting away from some of these policies that had worked and had been effective in securing the border. And now they've got this humanitarian crisis, national security crisis down there, which is desperately in need of a solution. One of the things they could do, there's been a lot of talk about infrastructure. The administration is talking about infrastructure bill. One important piece of infrastructure is to finish building the border wall. That would be really important, and it's already been funded. Congress has appropriated money for that. The administration has chosen not to take those dollars and to finish building out the wall. We heard from Border Patrol how important the wall is and how critical it is to the security down there. Just one observation about what the leader talked about, and that is the infrastructure bill. It's absolutely true that there is bipartisan support in the Congress. Has been in the past. I've been involved in my time in both the House and the Senate on the relevant committees in drafting and getting support for infrastructure bills. The 2015 FAST Act passed with a big bipartisan majority. I was involved in drafting that. There's always support for infrastructure as understood by most people. Infrastructure typically, and I think the American people understand what that is. It's roads and bridges and ports and waterways. And if we want to add broadband to that, I think there's some support for adding broadband to it. But the proposal that the administration has put forward spends more on electric vehicles than it does on roads and bridges and ports and waterways and airports combined. And then you add all the other stuff they have tried to consider into the definition of infrastructure. It is a massive expansion of the government, financed on the backs of the American taxpayers with taxes that will hurt the economy and cost us jobs. We can do this. We can do it the right way. And if the President is sincere about his calls for bipartisanship and unity, he'll sit down with Republicans and figure out a way to do something that is truly, truly infrastructure and in the best interest of the American people.
The administration's position on infrastructure seems to follow the old line, my way or the highway, and given that choice, I would take the highway because the highway is actually infrastructure as most Americans understand it. Instead, what we're looking at coming out of the White House is, to me, really a slush fund of liberal spending. It includes payoffs to big labor and also focuses on force-feeding the American people the Green New Deal. When most people think of infrastructure, we think of roads and bridges, which, as you know, is less than 6% of all of the money in the infrastructure bill. The electric vehicles, more money in that than it is for roads, bridges, ports, highways, all of the issues, airports as well. If you take a look at what's happening here under the guise of infrastructure, what we're also looking at is a war by this administration on fossil fuels, something that could kill 1 million American jobs, make people pay much more to heat their homes, to drive their vehicles, and make us more dependent on foreign sources of energy. If you just dig into this infrastructure bill, there's $100 billion in it to make our schools greener. So you look into that and say, what does that actually mean? Well, it means remodeling the school cafeterias and the kitchens to serve greener meals, to eliminate paper products, to make the trays that they serve the meals on recyclable. This isn't infrastructure. This is radical, extreme, dangerous. It's scary. That's where this Democrat Party is trying to take our nation.
So last week, the White House named a 36-member commission to look at the Supreme Court. Clear that one of the objectives of that commission would be to talk about expanding the court. Justice Ginsburg had the view late in her life that 9 was about the right number. Justice Breyer just last week said he thought 9 was the right number. The Constitution doesn't say how many judges there should be, but for about 150 years the number has been 9. This is a commission largely made up of academics, even as opposed to active lawyers. None of those academics appear to be a historian who'd look at the history of the court and what happens in the court. The other thing I don't like about the commission is I can't remember a time in the history of the country when a president appointed a commission to publicly review how the Supreme Court was doing its job. I think that gets very dangerously into one branch of the government getting beyond the balance that the Constitution so thoughtfully thought of. I think it's a bad idea. I think the goal of the commission is clearly to come back, and one of the options would be to enlarge the court. Eventually, if you enlarge the court and they put 2 or 3 judges on because Republicans were able to add 3 judges, and next time we're in control, we add 3 judges because Democrats were able to add 3 judges. Before you know it, the court may be as big as the 36-member commission or even the United States Senate. It is a bad road to go down. I think that we need to watch this very carefully as they begin to hold public hearings on how the Supreme Court is doing its job.
The past 2 weeks, I have been out on my annual 99 county tour. Senator Grassley was also out as well. And I just want to note on the record, I am ahead of Senator Grassley. I have 50 counties done now. He's just made too many Dairy Queen stops. That's what we'll say. He needs to catch up. But there were two main themes while I was out meeting with Iowans in all different types of industry and business and from all different communities. And those two themes, the first one was, why is Washington, D.C. spending so much? Iowans are really, really concerned about what we spent in the COVID-19 package. And by we, I mean Congress, not Republicans, but Congress. Why they put forward such a huge package that really wasn't targeted towards COVID-19 relief. And they're all very concerned about how do we pay for that now. The second theme that came up obviously was infrastructure, because Iowans are all about infrastructure. But when we started talking about the infrastructure bill, they were saying, well, what then is not infrastructure? Because it sounds like everything under the sun is now considered infrastructure. And again, go back to theme number one, how do we pay for all of that? So typically, Iowans think of infrastructure as roads and bridges, perhaps our locks and dams on the Mississippi River. And as Senator Thune said, certainly broadband is entering as part of that discussion. That's what we think of as infrastructure. But right now, what's proposed in this bill, less than 5 to 6% of it actually goes to what Iowans think of as infrastructure, our roads and bridges. And as pointed out earlier, there is more for electric vehicles in this proposal than roads and waterways, which is absolutely unbelievable to me. So anyway, let's get back to the basics. Iowans are really, really upset with the Biden administration right now. They feel that they have broken away from the promises that were made during the campaign season, and they are just very disheartened because a lot of them are great, hardworking individuals, and they feel that their children and grandchildren are going to bear the brunt of this spending spree in Washington, D.C.
This morning, the Consumer Price Index came out. Annualized, it's just for the last 12 months, it's 2.6%. But if you actually take January, February, and March, it's much higher than that. If you look at last Friday, the Producer Price Index came out. If you annualize the first quarter of this year, it's over 10%. So what we're starting to see is a significant risk of inflation in this country. The Democrats and the Federal Reserve need to wake up and start looking at this and how they're going to deal with this, because this impacts the poorest families. I grew up in a family, I watched my mom struggle to put food on the table. So when you see inflation, when you see food prices up 3.6% in 1 year, when you see gas prices up 23% in 1 year, the poorest families get hurt the most with that. And so I think it's important that the Federal Reserve and the Biden administration start thinking about how they're going to stop this increase in inflation.
Manu?
Over the weekend, the former president criticized you rather harshly. Also, the NRSC gave President Trump an award for freedom. Your reaction to both of those developments?
Well, what I'm concentrating on is the future. And what we are confronted with here is a totally left-wing administration with a slight majority in the House, a 50-50 Senate, trying to transform America into something no one voted for last year. No one voted to transform America into something totally different. 50-50 Senate, couple of seat majority in the House. They want to try to fundamentally change America into something it's never been. And so, Manu, that's what I'm concentrating on.
Are you worried that that would be a harder
Leader McConnell, are you and other Republicans planning to support the motion to proceed on the anti-API hate bill tomorrow? And if so, what amendments would you like to see on it?
Will you take your mask off?
Are Republicans planning to support the motion to proceed on the anti-AAPI hate bill tomorrow? And if so, what amendments are you hoping to see?
Yeah, I can tell you as a proud husband of an Asian American woman, I think this discrimination against Asian Americans is a real problem. And it preceded the murders that were recently on full display. And I'm hoping we can work out an agreement to get on the bill in a normal way, have some amendments, and move to final passage. Yeah.
Johnson & Johnson has the vaccine pause in the United States. You've been trying to get Republicans, especially in your state, to get vaccinated. Does this make them more hesitant, do you think, or is this a prudent decision?
Well, I hope not, because we've got two other vaccines that are not in dispute, and almost every state has, I believe, the other two. I do think it's extremely important to finish the job. If you're a football fan, it seems to me we're in the red zone, but we're not in the end zone. And to get to herd immunity, we're being told we need 75% of Americans to get vaccinated. So putting Johnson & Johnson aside for the moment until they decide the way forward on that, at least there are two other alternatives, and I would encourage everybody to get vaccinated.
Senator McConnell, do you have any reaction to the Senate parliamentarians' ruling last week on allowing Democrats to revise the budget resolution to do multiple reconciliation vehicles? Because what's the limit to this going forward?
Well, first of all, I have a lot of confidence in the parliamentarian. I think she's an credible umpire, trying to call the balls and strikes, if you will. Exactly what this ruling ultimately means will be determined by the form any subsequent efforts through reconciliation might take. But, look, I think it's important to remember that we have not one but two Senate Democrats, Senator Manchin and Senator Sinema, who both said, number one, under no circumstances will they get rid of the legislative filibuster, but they've also addressed reconciliation and expressed significant reservations about using it to end-run normal legislative process. So I think we have concerned Democrats here who may be beginning to get a little sticker shock by how much we've added to the national debt, who are becoming a little more independent. For example, I read there are several Democrats in the House that said no SALT, no deal. Just lining everybody up and getting all 50 in one place when you're not talking about COVID relief may be a challenge for them. Thank you.